be considered by the House of Commons. Order. We come now to the urgent question. Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 6th of January, it was reported in the Observer that the government had...
The Honourable Lady is always ahead of herself. Now, what she does at this stage is just say to ask the Minister for a statement on. We'll get her full blast in a moment. Margaret Greenwood.
Speaker, will she make a statement on universal credit?
Thank you. Minister Alok Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I outlined in the written statement tabled last Friday in the House, we have decided to replace the current regulations relating to managed migration previously laid before the House with two new sets of regulations. These will allow a series of measures relating to universal credit to be put in place. The Government will seek powers in an affirmative set of regulations for a pilot of managed migration, so the Department cannot issue any more migration notices once 10,000 people have been awarded universal credit throughout the process. These regulations will also deliver our commitment to provide transitional protection for those managed migrated to universal credit. Separate regulations will put in place a severe disability premium gateway, allowing recipients of this benefit to continue to claim existing benefits until they are managed migrated onto universal credit. In addition, my statement reported that we are bringing forward the necessary legislation to remove the planned extension of the policy to provide support for a maximum of 2 children in universal credit. This overall policy ensures that parents receiving benefits face the same financial decisions about the size of their family as those supporting themselves solely through work. However, we decided that it would not be right to apply this policy to children born before it came into law on the 6th of April 2017, and so we have cancelled this extension. Mr. Speaker, the benefits freeze up to April 2020 was voted for by Parliament as part of the Welfare Reform and Work Act 2016. As a general point, any changes relating to benefit uprating will be brought before Parliament in the usual way.
Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 6th of January, it was reported in the Observer that the Government had decided to ask for powers from Parliament for a pilot of the managed migration of 10,000 people from legacy benefits to universal credit, rather than for a managed migration as a whole. However, on the 7th of January, at oral questions, and the following day, in response to an urgent question, ministers failed to provide clarification on the Government's plans. Then on Thursday, the Secretary of State told Sky News she didn't expect the Social Security freeze to be renewed when it came to an end in April 2020. And on Friday, the 11th of January, the Secretary of State made a wide-ranging speech on Social Security about her intentions in relation to managed migration, private sector rents, childcare costs and the 2-child limit. But she did not make it in this House, nor did she give members the opportunity to ask questions about these really important matters. On the same day, the High Court found in favour of 4 single mothers who had brought a legal challenge against the Government on the grounds that universal credit failed to take into account their fluctuating income when they were paid twice in a month because their payday fell very near the end of the month. So can the Minister tell the House, how does the Government intend to respond to the High Court judgment? Does he think the 2-child limit is fair for the children affected by it? And will the Government not scrap the 2-child limit altogether? Will the Government address the key concern with managed migration that nobody's claim for benefits that they are currently receiving will be ended until they have made a successful new claim for universal credit? Will the Government make sure that the levels set for payments to people in receipt of severe disability premium who have already transferred to universal credit reflect the financial loss that they have suffered? Will the Government take immediate action to ensure no one has to wait 5 weeks to receive their initial payment for universal credit? Why is the benefits freeze not going to be cancelled now rather than waiting until April 2020, as she says she believes that the reasons for it being introduced no longer apply? And finally, will this Government call a halt to the rollout of universal credit?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Lady for her comments. Could I just say that very many people outside this House, many stakeholders, have welcomed the statements that were made in this House on Friday and, of course, what the Secretary of State said in her speech. And I'm sorry she welcomed the positive changes that have been made and are being proposed. She talked about a number of issues, and let me just go through them, Mr. Speaker. She talked about the legal judgment on Friday. as she herself has acknowledged, that judgment came out literally a few days ago. As a department, we will consider it very carefully and then respond. In terms of the two-child policy, of course, we have made that change, and the regulations were laid on Friday, as she will be aware. But she talks about the overall two-child policy, and we do believe that the overall policy is fair. Ultimately, those who are receiving support in the welfare system should be facing the same sort of choices that those who support themselves solely through work do. And it's worth pointing out that for a family that supports themselves solely through work, if they decide to have another child, they wouldn't automatically expect their wages to go up. This is about sustainability. She talked about the pilot. We've made it very clear that this will start in July 2019. We're working with a very long range of stakeholders on this. We talked about the severe disability premium. Of course, those regulations have been laid. And she talked about the benefit freeze. Could I just ask her to reflect, Mr. Speaker, the reason that we have had to make various policy choices in the past? And that is because the absolutely awful financial mess left to us by the last Labour government. I'm sorry, she can't get away from that point. And the final thing I would say to her, she talks about, Mr. Speaker, changes to the 5-week period. What I would just say to her is that if she is so keen, and I've said it in this House before, if she's so keen on supporting claimants, and particularly the vulnerable, which we on this side are, why did she not support the £1.5 billion of support that came in Budget 2017 and the £4.5 billion of support announced in the 2018 budget?
Order. On account of the fact that we have a Prime Ministerial statement to follow and then 8 hours of protected time for the debate on the withdrawal agreement, I am looking to conclude these exchanges by 4:15, and I'm sure colleagues will want to factor that into their calculations. Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, can I firstly congratulate my right honourable friend the Minister and his Secretary of State on the progress they're making in eliminating some of the obvious defects that have emerged in this otherwise highly desirable policy. Does he agree with me that the problem is the details were designed by people who were well-intentioned but too paternalistic in their attempts to introduce people to the disciplines and normal way of life of people in work, when they were dealing with people often who were very vulnerable and relying day to day on cash? So when it is affordable, after we've really recovered from the consequences of the financial disaster, will he address the 5-week delay in the first payment, which just caused hardship and I hope is gone by the time that the so-called migration comes to my constituency?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend for his support for the policies that we have announced. I just say to him that in terms of the 5-week period, we of course have ensured that people can get support from day one if they're required in terms of 100% advances. There's 2 weeks of housing benefit run-on that's available as well. And as part of the package we announced in the budget, there is additional run-on support available that will come in from 2020. But of course he's right. We need to make sure that throughout this process we support the most vulnerable, and that's exactly what the changes that have been announced have been all about.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I would like to say how inappropriate it is that the Secretary of State made this statement on Friday outside the House and hasn't even bothered to come here today, Mr. Speaker, to speak for herself. We in the SNP welcome this U-turn from the Secretary of State, which vindicates what we, along with a range of charities, women's organisations and faith groups, have been saying since the July budget in 2015. However, none of us will be fully satisfied while the two-child limit applies for births after the 6th of April 2017. It must be scrapped now. The Secretary of State has accepted already that the fundamental unfairness of the two-child limit. So why does he feel this policy, with its cruel and pernicious rape clause, with this form, Mr. Speaker, must continue even though it has been ruled unfair for other people? Does he not see that this creates a two-tier system in universal credit depending on when children were born? Mr. Speaker, we cannot plan for everything in our life. Has he heard the evidence from Turn to Us and CPAG that the two-child policy is forcing women into terminating healthy pregnancies? Has he heard of the discrimination from religious and ethnic minorities? Does he know that most people claiming this benefit are actually in work? In its first year of operation, it affected 73,520 530 people. So where does the figure of 15,000 come from, Mr Speaker? Friday's court ruling laid bare the flaws in universal credit, which many in this House have been highlighting around the payment and the timings of payments. High Court judges said that the DWP had wrongly interpreted the relevant regulations and tried to justify this shamefully on the grounds of cost. What steps will he take to put this right? And will he stop wasting money in the courts rather than ensuring our constituents get what they are fully entitled to? And lastly, Mr Speaker, in its final year alone, the benefit freeze will cut £4.7 billion from the welfare budget, more than the money that the Chancellor pledged for the work allowance for the next 4 years. Will he make the case to the Chancellor to scrap the freeze, which is making life so hard for so many of our constituents?
Mr Speaker, I'm grateful that the Honourable Lady has welcomed the changes that have been announced. For that I am indeed grateful. She refers to the Secretary of State. She will be aware that the statement in terms of the changes was made in my name. The regulations have been laid in my name, and that is absolutely appropriate that I come here and quite rightly answer questions that colleagues have. She talked about the non-consensual conception clause, and of course I absolutely agree with her that women who find themselves in these utterly awful circumstances need to get the help that they need, and this has to be done in the most compassionate way. And we have had a discussion on this point previously. What I would say to her, she's aware it is purely a question of whether the circumstances that are described are consistent with someone who has met the criteria for this exception. And it is, of course, the individuals that are dealing with this are third-party professionals who already have experience in supporting vulnerable women. And the final point, in terms of the court judgment on Friday, Mr Speaker, as I've said, we will consider that and respond.
John Redwood.
I welcome the emphasis on helping people into work and the idea that we should have compassionate implementation. With that in mind, are there going to be changes on earlier timing of benefit for those first in need of it? And is there going to be some review of the housing element, which has sometimes also caused trouble?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend for his question. Of course, he's right. Throughout this process, we have to provide support, particularly for the vulnerable. And as he will know, once universal credit is fully rolled out, there will be over an extra £2 billion in the welfare system than under the current legacy benefits. But of course, we have to help the vulnerable. And one of the changes that was made in the budget was the uplifting of work allowances, which will be helping young parents with children, and of course, also the disabled.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Any improvements of this hideous programme are welcome, but there are still going to be thousands of UC claimants that are moved on to universal credit this year as a result of natural migration with no transitional protections. So how many people will be pushed into poverty as a result of this move and of the lack of compassion by this government in unfreezing the benefit system?
Mr Speaker, as I've said previously in this House, and I said it earlier this afternoon, is that we have put more money into the system to support the most vulnerable. And that's absolutely right, and that is why we have done it. And as far as the pilot phase is concerned, of course, we will work very carefully with stakeholders to make sure we get this right.
Sir Nicholas Soames.
May I warmly welcome this excellent move by his department. And would he please pay tribute to the sympathetic, careful, diligent and effective manner in which the staff of the Job Centre Plus in Haywards Heath carry out their difficult duties?
My right honourable friend highlights a really important point, and he talks about the incredibly hard-working DWP staff in Haywards Heath Job Centre. But of course, I see this, the Secretary sees this, as we go up and down the country talking to our colleagues in job centres. They are all incredibly committed, and they do see the benefits of universal credit in helping people and making sure they provide that one-to-one support to claimants, which wasn't in place previously.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I also welcome these modest steps in the right direction, but why did the Secretary of State and the Minister both deny a week ago the change which he's now announced about the separate regulations for the 10,000 migration? Will he respond to the point made by the Father of the House? The 5-week delay is indefensible. It is forcing people to rely on advances, putting them into debt right at the start of their claim.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know we've had this exchange before, and I'm sorry if he feels that I repeat myself, but of course it's important that we get money in people's pocket early. There's no question about that, and that is why we made the changes when we said that we would make sure that absolutely anyone who needed it could get up to 100% of their advances up front. I've talked about the 2-week run-on of those on housing benefit, which doesn't have to be repaid. And as he knows, also in the budget that's just been, we've also announced that from July 2020, those on out-of-work DWP benefits will also get a 2-week run-on.
Of the Job Centre Plus in Redditch said this is the best system she's seen in 30 years. She's been at the front line, Mr. Speaker. And does the Minister agree with me that today the Resolution Foundation have pointed out to the fact that it's those people at the lowest end of the income spectrum who are actually getting back into work? This is a truly progressive benefit, and it's great to see these reforms.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend highlights a very important point. I, in fact, was at the launch of the Resolution Foundation's report this morning, which highlighted precisely the point she's raised. And I would just say that I would encourage all colleagues, obviously on the government side, but also on the opposition side, to actually go to their job centres, visit and talk. No, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, if they would talk directly to the people responsible for providing that advice, I think they would find that the system is working.
Angela Regal.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister should not patronise the opposition by pretending that somehow we don't all do our constituency duty and we haven't been to visit our local job centres. I can assure him we have. And the problem with this benefit is that it was introduced to save money. Large cuts in welfare systems and payments were made. He's put a little bit back, which has got to be welcome, but he's not put back what was taken away. And what was taken away is leaving my constituents relying on food bank with not enough to eat. And he needs to recognise that reality.
Mr. Speaker, could I suggest that perhaps this week, if she has time, she and I talk directly with the colleagues in the job centre in her area, and let's have a discussion with them. Let's have a discussion with them and see how we can support her constituents even better.
Hugh Merriman.